The snow is falling, and it's getting colder now. Soon that time of year.
Welcome to the Deconstructionist podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson, and I'm here with a special Christmas bonus episode. This is a re-release, so for those of you who heard it a long time ago when it was first released back in 2017, then this will be a refresher for you, but I think a needed one. For those of you who have never heard this episode and or have never heard Dr. Alexander Shaia, then this will be a treat for you. Dr. Shaia is a dear friend of the podcast and has always been just an incredible guest. He always brings just such wisdom and beauty to the podcast, and this was a special one for us. He came on back in 2017. I think we released this one December 20th, so a few days before Christmas, and just an absolute favorite of ours. And so you'll hear Adam on here. This is a re-release from back in the day, and so enjoy that. But Dr. Shaia, if you're not familiar, his seminal work is a book called Heart and Mind, The Four Gospel Journey for Radical Transformation. You can check that out at his website, quadratos.com, QUADRATOS.com. You can also find it on Facebook as well. But it's a brilliant book. It really dives into the four Gospels, why there are four, and what each Gospel sort of represents. And then he's also a regular tour guide on the Camino, the pilgrimage trail in Spain, and has released a book on that as well that we've talked about on the podcast previously. So check it out. All that will be in the show notes. So again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll be back with part 2 of our most recent episode here in a couple days. So you get 2 episodes in 1 week. But Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever that looks like to you and yours. I know it's not always an easy holiday for everyone, and Christmas and family means very different things to very different people. And so my love goes out to you guys. Thank you so much as always, for listening to the podcast. You have no idea what it means to me to be able to continue to do this podcast year after year. And so thank you. And without further ado, I'm going to let Adam take it away. Here's Adam.
Sweet Uncle Shaia. Without further ado, Merry Christmas with Alexander freaking Shaia. Alexander Shaia, it is a delight. It's like having family back on the podcast, because I really feel like that's what you've become to John and I. So thank you welcome back to the States. We're glad you're healthy. Welcome back, I think for the 4th time?
Yeah, the reigning champion.
The reigning champion on Times on the Deconstructionist podcast. We just cannot wait for this conversation. Thanks for being with us again.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm home, and it's great to be with you guys.
Thank you.
Aww.
And I feel, and coming home from the Camino, I totally feel deconstructed. So
we are so jealous.
there's a challenge here. I mean, we've got 2 challenges, and we need to say it right up front. This is an adults only podcast, or this is not a family friendly podcast, whichever way we want to say that.
Ooh,
not your father's Christmas podcast.
and secondly, coming home from the Camino, I don't have a thought in my head. And this is actually the very first thing that I've done since getting back. And so let's see what happens.
Well, we're honored, and I'm sure you'll be just fine.
We can't wait to see what we are about to dig into now. But just so all of our listeners know, Alexander was definitely being serious. We are going to get into some explicit more content, and make sure children are not within earshot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the reason that you're back. Well, honestly, you could come on for any reason. Obviously, we have an open door policy with certain guests, and Alexander's definitely one of those. But we specifically wanted to pick your brain about the topic of Christmas. Now, this episode will be released the week leading into Christmas.
Yes,
this is our Christmas present for our listeners, and so.
Jingle bells, John. I thought we were going to do a little jingle bells.
Oh, that's the magic of editing. I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put that in later.
Good. Thank goodness.
So
it's like I'm restraining myself right now. We'll wait to the very end to say a certain greeting.
Perfect.
Okay.
So let's start off with, like, Christmas, like a lot of other Christian traditions, is something that's evolved and developed over time, and obviously historically it seems to be something of an amalgamation of an attempt by the early Christian church to convert over pagans, reverence for St. Nicholas, and absorption of some Nordic traditions. So I don't know if that's a good place to start, but maybe we could start with how would the early Christians have viewed Christmas, and how did that celebration start?
Oh, wow. We're just doing one podcast. Okay.
For now.
Right.
You never know.
Yeah.
The interior files are going just nuts right now. So
I love it.
I'm going to dive into this, but I really want to depend on you to sort of lead me through if I start going down stray paths.
Sure.
We like your straight paths, Alexander.
Yeah.
Well, so let's start with the fact that the Feast of Christmas doesn't come into Christianity until about 400 years. Now, I'm going to ask the indulgence and the patience of people who know a lot of information, because I want to speak in some generalities. I'm not going to be trying to nail the exact date that Christmas came into Christianity, but let's say roughly the year 400.
Okay.
So already that says that Christianity has moved forward in rapid expansion for 300 years without Christmas, without the Feast of Christmas. We know that spiritually, the core feast is what we talked about on our last podcast. Resurrection is Sunday and Easter. That's the ground zero feast of Christianity. However, right behind that comes Christmas. And it has everything to do with pagans in the most beautiful way possible. And I love the word pagan. It simply means earth. And Christmas is an earth feast. And one of the things that theologians today are talking about is that in Christianity, we talk about God incarnating twice. God incarnates because God puts God's self in the cosmos. That's the first incarnation. The second incarnation is Jesus the Christ. And those two incarnations, because they're both incarnations of God, must essentially agree with each other. They are both coming from the same place. So the Feast of Christmas is coming out of the first incarnation, the earth, and it's telling us the story of the second incarnation, Jesus the Christ. And those two incarnations are absolutely intertwined. And the core experience of the two is the darkness of winter. Because, and I'm actually going to just sort of give away the theme song here, Christmas is about a spiritual practice. And the spiritual practice is something that each one of us is called to do at a moment in the calendar year as a way to get us up to speed for that same moment that's going to happen in our interior lives that might be July or April or maybe December. And that outer moment of darkness is teaching us the spiritual practices for our inner moments of darkness. And the great truth of Christianity, and it's matched by most world religions, is if you want to find fresh radiance, you go to the deepest dark in yourself. Just as in the first incarnation, the fresh radiance on earth is born at the time of the deepest dark. And for those of us in the northern hemisphere, that's the winter solstice of December. For those of us in the southern hemisphere, that's the winter solstice of June. So Christmas is a teaching and an aid, an enlivening support for the most critical of all spiritual practices, which is to know that it's only by our courage and grace to go into the deepest darkness, which is where the fresh radiance is born. So there we have it. We don't know what day on the calendar Jesus was born. And almost nothing in the Christian calendar is based in history. It's based in spiritual practice, which is far more efficient and effective and grace-filled than history.
Now, talk a little bit about that, Alexander, because we live in a period of time where, you know, we're still haunted by modernity and enlightenment and reason and doctrine. And it wasn't so necessarily when all of this was getting started. So when you talk about the Christian calendar being rooted more in spiritual practices rather than history, I think maybe some ears are going to perk up and some people are going to find that really interesting. Will you talk just a little bit more about why that is and what the difference between then and now is?
Let's go back to, we've got the two incarnations. We've got God putting God's self in the cosmos, or actually that the cosmos is born of God's self, and we have Jesus the Christ. The cosmos, for us in the Northern Hemisphere, gives us an embodied incarnational experience of new radiance in the darkness when? The winter solstice and the days surrounding the winter solstice in December. The two incarnations must agree with each other, and they amplify and magnify each other so that the birth of Jesus the Christ is not a theological concept, but it's an embodied physical experience. And we can go back and we can thank the Celts in large measure for much of the Christian tradition around Christmas.
Oh, this is so good already. Say that again, what you were talking about with the embodiment. It's not a doctrinal statement. Will you just say that again? I want to hear that again.
We've got two incarnations, and they both tell us the great story of God. We have the incarnation of the cosmos, and we have the incarnation of Jesus the Christ, and they amplify each other. And so we know in our spiritual practice that the place of new radiance is found in the deepest dark. We know that on our own personal spiritual journeys. We're learning that in our corporate and collective and community journeys. But this is the great story that the cosmos proclaims at the winter solstice. The winter solstice is the time that the deepest dark has reached its greatest depth. And it's precisely at that moment that the reversal happens, that the new radiance begins. And so it's more than appropriate, it's perfect that Christmas is the winter solstice in Christianity, because Christmas brings together the two incarnations and tells the great story not as a mental concept, not as a historical concept, but as an embodied physical experience. Let's discuss why and how Christmas and the winter solstice are now 3 days apart. So if we go back in time to the time of Jesus and the first centuries of Christianity, the Western world was following the Julian calendar, created by Julius Caesar in the year 45 BC. In that calendar, December the 25th was a winter solstice. So Christianity discerned what day of the year should we celebrate the birth of Christ coming forth out of darkness. Well, we should celebrate it on the day that the cosmos tells the same story.
Wow.
All right. So for 1,000 years, December the 25th was both the winter solstice and the feast of Christmas. Then in the 16th century, Pope Gregory XIII created a new calendar called the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we live with in the Western world today. Now, the need for that calendar was because the Julian calendar was 362 days a year, not 365. And the Julian calendar did not take in account leap days.
Wow.
So by the time we get into the 16th century, the seasons are all wacky from the Christian calendar, and the Christian calendar was created because the season had the physical incarnational experience of the feast.
Wow.
So by the 1600s, Christmas is now in the springtime. And so the Roman Church, and I'd like to give the Roman Church credit when it does an occasional thing right, created a new calendar that was now going to be 365 days, no longer 362 days. So that meant every day on the calendar was going to, we're slipping 3 days in. So, and then we had to rectify also for leap year. So every fourth year we added a day. All right. The winter solstice now became December the 21st, December the 22nd. Now no longer the traditional feast of the solstice and the traditional feast of Christmas. And everybody is going nuts. Like, what do we do? What do we do? Do we move Christmas now to the new date of the winter solstice, or do we leave it on the traditional day of the 25th? How do we resolve this dilemma and really almost a crisis of faith?
Wow.
And dusty tomes and arguments written about what to do. And then we went back to the earth and we said, okay, what's going on here? Well, at the solstice, whether it's the winter solstice or the summer solstice, the word solstice literally means sun, stand still.
Right.
And for 3 days, the sun neither grows nor diminishes at the solstice. So for 3 days at the winter solstice, you can't see the sun increasing. And for 3 days at the summer solstice, you can't see the sun decreasing. All right, now, the winter solstice, the whole feast of Christmas is about the rebirth or the fresh growing radiance that comes out of the darkness that Jesus the Christ leads us through over and over again in our life. And what the church elders finally realized was, aha, Christmas now is even more perfect staying on the 25th, because 3 days after the night of the solstice will be Christmas morning. And on Christmas morning, the Celts can see the lengthening shadows on the standing stones, and the naked eye now has an experience of light's growth again.
Did they understand the fate of the world in a baby's hand? They were part of the story, part of a master plan. Did the stars know the light was
So Christmas almost becomes another like Easter.
In a way. I mean, certainly the theologians went on and on about Jesus is in the tomb 3 days and rises.
Right.
So Christmas morning is another resurrection. Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Oh, it's so cool.
Wow.
And it drives me to weep that we have people out there saying that a celebration of the winter solstice is anti-Christian. Nothing could be further from the truth. The winter solstice is the incarnation of God in the cosmos that tells the same story to us as Jesus the Christ.
Well, this is, Alexander, I'm thinking a lot about John's gospel right now while you're saying this stuff, because I know in that prologue, he's trying to do some of those things.
Well, yes. And to me, that's why John's prologue, as well as the whole gospel, is the deepest expression of our spirituality.
So let's go there. Let's talk, because the four gospels, the four paths, that's kind of your thing.
Yeah.
So,
the Quadratus Christmas.
yes. So like looking at the gospels, obviously Mark doesn't really talk a whole lot about it. He kind of skips and goes right to it. Jesus, his adult baptism. So where do we look when we want to look at the birth story? Where do we go?
All right, let me go. And again, I'm going to give kudos to my tradition again tonight. Wow. The second time in 20 minutes. This is a hit. This is all right. The early Christians told the story of Christmas starting at sundown on the 24th through mid-morning of the 25th. And they used 4 gospel narratives to tell the story as it matched and amplified what's going on in the earth and the sky at that hour.
Mm.
So the first gospel of Christmas, remember again that the church, the ancient church, and some churches today have restored that the church day begins at sundown or just after sundown.
Right.
Again, reminding us of the spiritual truth that when you go into darkness, that's the beginning. When you go into darkness, is the beginning.
Mm.
Go into darkness is the beginning. So at sunset or just after on the 24th, the early Christians would read the genealogy from the text of Matthew. Oh my gosh. There are a number of reasons. If this is not the Family Hour podcast.
I love it.
Matthew's genealogy has got all this gutsy stuff to it about people who found themselves in a time of great darkness. Like Tamar, who's mentioned in the genealogy, Tamar, who's Judah's daughter-in-law,
Oh, yeah.
and her husband has been killed, and she pleads with Judah to marry his 3rd son to her so he can stay in the line. And Judah says yes, but he doesn't bring his 3rd son to her. And so Tamar takes matters before God and sort of into her own hands, so to speak. And she dresses as a Vestal virgin and she stands outside the temple. This is 4,000 years ago, folks. But she stands outside the temple praying that Judah on his way to the temple will choose to lie with her, which, have sex with her, which is a form of prayer in those days. And she's disguised, and Judah does choose her, but doesn't recognize her. But before the deed is done, she asks for Judah's ring. And Judah gives the ring to her. The deed is done. And 3 months later, the text says, Tamar begins to show. And she knows what's coming now. Judah pronounces upon her the death sentence because it is his right 4,000 years ago. He owns a woman's body. He owns the woman's body of any women in his family. And she has brought displeasure and dishonor on the family name because she's gotten pregnant without his permission. And so Tamar only asks to meet with Judah before she's killed. And Judah agrees, and Tamar produces the ring. And thereby she remains part of the line of Abraham.
Man.
So we've got all of these you think that the genealogy is the most boring verses of the entire Gospels, and what's embedded in that genealogy are headlines like grocery store tabloids. And each one is just ringing in the ears of the original hearers about a dark time that person couldn't see their way out of.
Man.
And God, because they remained basically faithful, God brought them through. So, this is the first gospel of Christmas, proclaimed just as the sun goes down on December the 24th, because it's proclaiming the truth that we must hold on to when the sun goes down in our lives, not in our outer lives so much, but in our inner lives. This is your story. The genealogy is your staff. God's incarnation is not for people who believe they are perfect. God's incarnation are for those who have been humble and broken and weeping.
And experienced the darkness.
Yeah.
God.
So then we move to the second gospel of Christmas. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church still does this. The Roman Catholic Church still has this 4 texts of the 4 gospel texts of Christmas. The Presbyterian traditions, the Revised Common Lectionary, sadly, in my view, have reduced it down to 2. But okay, so we go now into the nighttime, and the Roman Catholic rules about this are you must read the second gospel of Christmas once night has fully set in. And so usually this gospel is 7 to 9 o'clock in the evening. And this gospel is from Luke. And it's the gospel of the angel coming to the shepherds in the fields, proclaiming a birth in Bethlehem. Now, just we are in the dead of night.
Mm.
And this is not about just the cold dead of night of December. This is about the cold dead night in you. And I hear about this type of night a lot today.
Mm.
I hear people in despair about the world and about their lives and about the direction that we seem to be moving, the brokenness and the fracturing. And that's what this gospel, that's the situation, the soil that this gospel is intended to be proclaimed upon. But we do it in Christmas night, in the dead of night, to remind us of the truth of when it happens in our lives. And so the angel comes to the shepherd. And we have to remember, we have to set aside for a moment those beautiful stained glass windows and picture books of shepherds, all nice with lambs cuddled in their arms, sweet things, courageous, strong, integrity types. Not these shepherds. Not first century, not these shepherds, not this story. These shepherds are people who are ravenous. They have been reduced and shunned and shamed so that they must do the work that no one else will do, which is to be in the field with the sheep and to smell like the sheep, because they have done something so offensive to civil society that they must wear the aroma of the sheep like a bell around their neck. It's better than a bell around their neck, because people will know a block away. A shepherd is here. Run the other way, hide, protect yourself. Do not speak to this one. This one has been cut off from us because they have so offended our code of ethics.
They're like the prodigal sons of the day.
They are. And yet in Luke's text, this is where the angel comes. And what's beautiful is, let's not talk about that outer person. Let's talk about that inner person. Let's talk about right now in the deep dark, in the interior life, in our emotions and our thoughts, that part of us that's in utter despair, that part of us that has no hope, that part of us who is so afraid about today and tomorrow. This angel is coming to that aspect of us and proclaiming that precisely because we are in this place, the promise that new radiance is born. And let us sing a magnificent Gloria. Now, we move to the third gospel of Christmas. Third gospel of Christmas is proclaimed at dawn of Christmas morning. And the gospel, Luke's gospel of the angel with the shepherd, the angel who announces and the host that sing to the shepherds. The text stops right at the proclamation. But at dawn, we pick the text up, and now we hear that the shepherds go to Bethlehem and see the birth. Just as we are on our way to church at dawn, we see that sunrise on third morning after the solstice. So now the third gospel of Christmas is no longer about walking with faith that the promise will be fulfilled. Now at third dawn, we see, we experience in our bodies. Faith is no longer a matter of mental exercise. Faith is now a known experience. It is. Birth is. Darkness has reached its zenith, and is now past. And now is the time of the new light. So then we move on. That's not the final gospel of Christmas. The final gospel of Christmas Day in this cycle is the prologue of John, which is to be proclaimed in the full light of Christmas morning.
Man.
And John's text is, remember the two incarnations. Remember that the power and the beauty of Jesus the Christ is the reality that Jesus the Christ magnifies in that same incarnation of the cosmos. That the two incarnations, we celebrate their fresh radiance on Christmas morning.
It's amazing. It's amazing to me when I hear you talk about specifically John's gospel. Especially Western Protestant Christianity is so doctrinaire. It's so cerebral, and we forget that the poetry of John's prologue, calling us to remember the birth of reality as we know it. Hearkening back to Genesis, and then manifesting, ultimate reality in Jesus the Christ as being this man, this is so deep. This is so big. This isn't about just religion or doctrine or anything else. It's huge.
And it's the magnificent truth that's in human smallness and in the grandeur of the cosmos. That God is born within all of us, not just us humans. God is born within all of us. Therefore, Christmas becomes the feast of the family of the cosmos. Christmas is the feast by which we know that we are brother and sister to animal and sand and soil and stardust and cosmos.
Yes.
We all are made of the same substance.
So one of the things that I love in your work is your ability to talk about the differences between the Gospels and make sense of it. So one of the things that I've always thought was fascinating about the different accounts of the birth story within the Gospels is just the fact that obviously, as we've talked about in previous episodes with you when talking about the four gospel journey, is the fact that each writer, each author is talking to a different audience, what that would have meant to that specific audience. And specifically, I just love the way that the Gospel of Luke kind of approaches this birth story, where it really shows that Jesus is the Savior for all people, Gentiles and Jews, and really makes a point to focus on this very lowly birth. Like this coming Messiah is one for all people, regardless of your station. So I wondered if you could kind of talk about why it's important to understand the audience that these Gospels were writing to.
I was having this conversation with a friend today, and this friend was asking me to tell me about a translation in John. And the thing is that I never want to start with what Jesus said. I want to start with why Jesus was saying it. And I wish, my work of Quadratus and the Four Gospel Journey and the book Heart and Mind, the Four Gospel Journey for Radical Transformation. This book is about teaching us that we can have a credible way to understand why Jesus was saying these things. And once you understand the context of why Jesus is saying it, it's not just a matter about what the text says, because what the text says is just like an anthology. It's just a whole bunch of wonderful wisdom, but how do I apply it? So Luke's text is written at a moment when the Jewish and Christian communities are in a horrible divorce with each other. This is the mid-'80s of the first century. And we've broken apart from each other, and there's pain on both sides of this awful moment. There's nothing worse than the fight in the family. And the gospel author is inspired to tell the story of Jesus to the Christian community about how to move through this moment so that they do not become resentful and bitter about their removal from the synagogue and their removal from Jewish life. But there's a second impact here, and the second impact is that because of what we as Christians are coming to understand about the message of Jesus, we are now choosing to live our lives differently. We're choosing to live our lives in a way that we say to everybody, your brother and sister, no matters what bloodline you're from. Doesn't matter who your mama was. Doesn't matter where you were born on the planet. Doesn't matter if you're free or slave. Doesn't matter if you're male or female. In this understanding of God, we are equal brothers and sisters. Yes, we have different work, but we're of equal worth and respect. And because we choose to live this way, the emperor wants to condemn us when it wants to make us criminals. In fact, does make us criminals, because living this way is an anathema to the Roman rule of law, which is built on power and brutality, privilege, where a man owns women, where a person of wealth has a right to treat a person without wealth in any way that that person wants to, including having them killed. They're property. They're not human beings. And we're also developing an ethos that we take care of each other, that our goods are held for the good of all, not just for our own good. All of these values are not values that the emperor wants to get started in his empire, because he knows that such values, such actions would undermine his authority.
Yeah.
So he makes us criminals and he begins to execute us. So in this moment that we are bearing the wound of the bitter fight in the family, and now must stand as criminals before the emperor, Luke gives us this text, his gospel, which is very much a text of nonviolent resistance. It's very much a text of, we are going to hold the spiritual practice regardless of the consequences that come back on us, regardless of the fact that we're not going to get the good schools, or we probably aren't going to have the best health care. And we know that only by our holding to spiritual practice will God ultimately raise up new value in our culture. Christians did this for 225 years. 225 years before the emperor was no more. So now when we look back at the opening of Luke's text, and we have Luke give us the historical days of Jesus' birth, it's Luke that gives us that. It's Luke that names the census of Caesar Augustus. Well, and I know, and I hope that the family here is out of earshot, because we're all going to go to these incredibly beautiful Christmas pageants at school and church, and we're going to hear about this decree of Caesar Augustus to go back to your hometown and be counted. My hope is that when we hear the name Caesar Augustus, we'll know that Caesar Augustus is right there in line with Adolf Hitler. Caesar Augustus is one of the world's most horrific authoritarian bullies. He brutalized an empire for his own wealth and power. He kept a people an inch away from starvation, so they couldn't have the strength to raise their arms against his army. There is no such thing as the 100 years of the peace of Augustus. It's the 100 years of brutality where no one dared raise themselves in opposition. This is that Caesar Augustus. So when Luke tells us about who's emperor and who's governor in Syria and in Palestine, And who's in the temple in Jerusalem when Jesus is born? What Luke is saying is, look, those were the darkest days in humanity. The government was against you, and your temple will become the stooge of the government and were only looking out for themselves. The people felt they were powerless and had nowhere to turn. Nobody was listening to them. No one could turn this around. And this gospel is written to talk about the spiritual truth, not the historical truth. It happened in history, but that's not its glory. The glory is it's happening right now. It happens in every moment of time, that at the deepest dark, new radiance is born. We that know that at the deepest dark, the new radiance is born, have the strength, not of hope, but of belief. We don't know when the turnaround is going to come. God, I hope it's this afternoon or tomorrow. But what I know by faith is it will happen. It is the truth of our God, and it is part of the incarnation of our cosmos. And it's the reality of Jesus the Christ. There is no depth of darkness that will ever ultimately win.
Something you said a minute ago, I thought maybe was germane for some of the people listening right now. You had mentioned that this gospel was written in the context of a great divorce between the Jews and the Christians. And a lot of people listening to this podcast right now find themselves in the middle of a kind of a divorce from maybe the type or the interpretation of whatever religion that they were maybe originally brought up with. They, kind of like we've talked about in past episodes, the hero's journey oftentimes requires a leaving, which feels really, really difficult and brings a great deal of pain. And I just feel like so much of what you're saying can speak to that as well.
Absolutely. And it's why it's the power and the beauty of that genealogy at sundown on Christmas, at that moment that we leave the 24th and we move into the 25th. And we hear about Tamar, who had to do something that many were going to consider highly unethical. And we hear about David, the king, who became an accomplice to murder for lust. And we hear about Rahab, who owns the house of ill repute in the city of Jericho. And yet she hides the Jewish spies in the city, and she shows them the ways to get through the walls at night after the gates have come down. And therefore, for that glorious act, she's part of salvation history. Mm-hmm. And we also hear about Ruth, who, for the love of a fellow sister who's no longer Jewish. So we have all of these great stories of people who find themselves in situations that others would go, point their finger, wag their tongues, and say, certainly that behavior is not of God. And yet God acts in the midst of each one of these untoward situations. That's quote unquote salvation history. Mm-hmm. And just like it happened in their lives, it will happen in our life. It will happen in our heart.
I think so. I think for myself, and I don't know about you, John, but I know even in my family, like there's especially in the political season we find ourselves in, and the spiritual season we find ourselves in, there's a lot of judgment just flying around. And a lot of people, creating new enemies for themselves or feeling estranged, this time of year because of maybe their lifestyle or their, political leaning or their spiritual doubting or faith or lack of faith or whatever. And I feel like everything you're saying right now is speaking into those situations?
Well, I'm speaking to my own life and my own experiences, and we've talked about this at other times, but I had to step out from my family. And there was nothing in my Lebanese lineage of generations upon generations that ever said a Lebanese son could step out. But I had to. For the God in me and the voice in me of wisdom, I had to.
Mm.
And it's still pain. I mean, I know I had to. I know that I did the best that I could. I know that I fulfilled, I think, what Spirit was asking of me. None of that takes away the pain. I was with my family recently, and for me, as much as I love them, and I know they love me, but that pain still sits there. They really can't grasp who I am and what I've done.
It's difficult.
It is. And yet I also know that I could not be doing this work. It was like each of us have to go to that place of the deepest dark, and there we'll find the fresh radiance. There we'll find the new grace of Jesus the Christ, whatever language you want to use. And the way that we get to the deepest dark is going to feel lonely and painful, and it's going to be filled with a sense of betrayals and abandonment.
So one of the things I find so remarkable about the work that you do is that you always bring us new insights and new eyes with which to see, material that we've read over and over and over again. And again, you're doing the same thing with the birth story and the celebration of Christmas. So, and what you just said, I literally wrote this quote down. I'd heard you say this in another interview with Rob a couple of years back. The only place radiance can be born is within the depths of darkness. And for a society of people who I think it's safe to say we do everything in our power to avoid darkness and to avoid pain and to avoid suffering, even though there can be beauty and light found within that. I don't know. How do we encourage people to embrace that and to seek the rebirth that comes as a result?
How much time do we have?
I love you, Alexander.
Well, I wish I had a pat answer, and here are some touchstones. First, obviously, is prayer and meditation, and the way that prayer and meditation is an infilling for you. But secondly, go find those stories, go find those movies that touch you about the courage to make that journey. Now, what are the movies that have really touched you? Those people who have gone through those really difficult times and they've seen the turnaround. We know it in other people's lives, and I'm willing to bet that every one of us has got a place in our own life that we know it too, although we probably have discounted it in some way. But prayer, meditation, the stories of others, and then at least one rock solid good friend who you almost literally trust with your life and will help you not wallow in despair. They'll walk with you, but they won't let you wallow. Every one of us has a journey to make. And I just came back from leading 8 pilgrims, 55 days on the Camino, and I'm teaching myself about being a guide on the Camino. And it's like I so want to be able to help people transform without going through the pain.
Yeah.
And I so want to be a person that can sit there and backslap and tell them it's going to be all right and compliment them. And I will to a point. But the reality is you have to find it in yourself. And when anyone else does it for you, you ultimately won't find it in yourself. Jung has this quote, and I've used it maybe too often, but I've really learned the truth of it. It's only when your ego feels totally abandoned that the deep healing powers are activated.
Oof. I think I heard Joel Osteen say that once.
Stop.
You know what I love about that, Alexander, is it rings so true because no part of me wants to hear that.
No, to say it.
Or to say it. And that's actually one of my acid tests in life at this point. You start to recognize, the voice of your ego and how it's always trying to protect itself. And you're right. It is the leaving, it is the pain, it is the darkness that we have to move into. And I love how you lay out the Gospels in a way that helps us do that. Thank you so much for your work, friend.
Hey, I'm trying to take that in, guys. And I so appreciate the two of you.
So before we say goodbye for now.
Yeah, I've got one more piece. I don't know if we've got time.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Do it.
It's like I want to do this piece about St. Nicholas and Santa Claus.
Yes.
Because it really bears on the spiritual practice of the darkness. And the Christianity and Jesus want to teach us about one of the ways that we work with the place of darkness is that we stretch ourselves to utter generosity. Because when we're in that place in darkness, we want to pull in. We want to circle the wagons, and we want to count our resources, and we want to hold on to them really tight.
And take a nap.
Yeah.
And that's exactly opposite from what spiritual practice is teaching us. Spiritual practice is saying, when you're at that place of the utter darkness, open your heart in generosity to others. So when Christianity was met with this myth of Santa Claus in the northern climes of Europe, we wanted to find the deeper truth of Santa Claus, because there's a truth there. But we wanted to find the deeper truth. And we wanted to find it in an incarnational way in our history and then bring it forward as a spiritual practice. That's what we do. Is we find a historical story and we bring it forward not as history, but we bring it forward as a spiritual practice for us to model. And so our model became St. Nicholas. Now, St. Nicholas was the great saint of the first 1,000 years of Christianity in the way that we might think of St. Francis as the great saint of the second 1,000 years.
Wow.
Now, who was Nicholas? Nicholas was a young boy, orphaned. Both of his parents died when he was quite young. He came from an incredibly wealthy family. Let's just, in today's terms, he had billions. He grows up, he has the character of holiness. He's called early to be a priest. And then some say even as early as the age of 18 is elected bishop. If that's true, let's also remember that in those days, the lifespan was somewhere in your 40s. But as bishop, what he would do is he would take care of his people secretly. He would find ways to gift them with money and objects that they needed. And there are the stories, the sort of the classic story of St. Nicholas is his city was being ravaged by people having to sell their children into slavery to live. Mm. And they were having to sell their daughters into sex slavery to live. And so what Nicholas would do is he would bundle up gold coins as a dowry and leave them on the doorsteps of these young girls so that the girls had a dowry and wouldn't have to be sold into slavery. Nobody knew who was doing this until after Nicholas died. And they discovered that he died with almost no money left. So there is a great truth in Santa Claus in the depths of the darkness of December. Let us remember that what aids the arrival of the fresh radiance is our personal generosity. And a generosity which is not only of giving what we have, but perhaps even stretching a bit into what we actually think we need. That's the story of Christmas.
Well, I'm gonna scratch off that last question I had.
Yep, we're ending right there.
Yep. Wow. Thank you so much for coming back. Adam and I know the three of us have had this plan for months, since the last time you were on, actually, in the spring. And we just knew that you were going to have some good stuff to say, and we're super excited about this. And we just hope that the people listening out there really take this as just a beacon of light and a bit of hope in a season where some families aren't as fortunate as others. So if you're struggling out there, if you're in a dark place, I hope this episode helped you in some way. So
Merry Christmas, Alexander.
From the bottom of my heart to everybody, and especially to those in the depths of an interior darkness, may the Christ come quickly.
The stars hung in the sky, gazing upon the world that night, a world that was different and finally had a chance.
Oh, we did it again. He did it again.
I have very few words. I really do.
We've had him on. He is the reigning champion.
He is.
It's almost like SNL, where I feel like we should hand out those blazers like they do for like
Justin Timberlake,
10-time host or whatever
like
it is.
Alec Baldwin.
Yes. Like he's the reigning. He and Peter Rollins, we've cultivated friendships with, and they know we've made it abundantly clear, like, hey, we appreciate and value what you bring to the table, and so yeah, you guys are always welcome to come on, and we've been fortunate and from benefiting from their wisdom and having had them on multiple times, and we've had this plan for months.
Mm-hmm.
I think since we did the Easter episode with him.
Yep.
He was like, hey, what would you guys think about talking a little Christmas closer to the holidays? And we were like, yeah.
Yeah, we don't say no to that.
No,
we don't say no to that.
honestly, he could be like, let's talk about broccoli, and I'd be like, I'm sure you got something good in there. Okay.
Brussels sprouts, broccoli, asparagus.
Yeah. He'd be like, well, let me tell you about the history. I'm like, oh, okay.
But, just being able to, I think that the mark of a truly gifted spiritual teacher is to draw on ancient sources and create freshness, fresh insight, fresh life.
Yeah.
Not necessarily even fresh insight, because even the insights are like ancient, but the way that nobody's put them into the words that like Alexander Shaia uses.
Right.
And with his background in, anthropology and psychiatry and, studying under Joseph Campbell and knowing this fourfold path to the Gospels, the Quadratus, the way he does.
Yeah.
Man, as somebody that has probably studied Bible more than I would even care to think about, truly.
Yeah.
I could sit at his feet and listen to him talk about this stuff all day, because not only is it really divine, it's really human.
Yeah. And for the history nerd in me, I always appreciate having him on, because he does. So like, he has this understanding and appreciation of who the original audiences would have been and what these messages would have meant to them and why they were written differently from one another. So like, why the Gospel of Luke has a different focus, than the Gospel of like Matthew, but why that's important. And so like, yeah, you look at people who spend their days arguing like over like differences between them and discrepancies or whatever. And you've got the scholar like Shaia, who's just like, no, like they were fully aware of the differences, and that you're missing the point.
Right.
Let's take a deeper look here.
Yeah.
There's treasure to be mined here.
So much treasure. And just his ability to, well, let me say this. I think one of the things that I can kind of put my finger on that I like about him so incredibly much is that with some people, you're just listening to somebody who's just brilliant. They're just gifted and they're brilliant and they're scholarly and they've read a bunch of stuff and they're really good at like outlining it for you.
Yeah.
And I always respect scholars like that. And then what Shaia brings to the table, in my opinion, is you learn, but like more than that, I get a sense when he's talking that this is coming from a deep, almost groaning, real place from within him that it's so internalized in him that I almost care less about what he says. And I'm more just love the, like, to use a hippie phrase, like the vibe that he just sends out, that I'm like, this guy it means so much to him.
Yeah.
Beyond just like, look at all this stuff I know. You can tell it's changed him. I mean, he almost aches when he talks.
Yeah.
Because it means so much to him.
Yeah, he reminds me of, it's almost like when you see a really good musician who writes a really personal song to them and then performs it and loses themselves so much in the moment that, like, all of their emotions are spilling out in that moment on stage.
That's exactly it.
Like, I just keep thinking, I'm like, man, he must do these interviews and pour all this stuff out of him and just be exhausted. Yeah. But, like, what a treasure. And, like, he's not one of those guys who's, you know, like, at the moment as well known as, like, a Rob Bell or, like, some of the other big names in the industry. But my gosh,
I wish he was.
Yeah, I think
and Heart and Mind, we got the paperback.
Oh crap, yeah,
Heart and Mind,
second edition.
Everybody get on Amazon right now and order yourself a paperback copy of Heart and Mind, second edition.
Yeah, second edition.
What is it? How much is it?
Let's look.
Isn't it like $11 or something?
It's not. Yeah, it's so, like, originally it was really hard to find. There was only like a hard copy of the original printing.
I think we paid like $50 for our first one.
Yes, I did. But the new one, there's a second edition, second printing that just came out, and pulling up on Amazon right now. Second edition paperback you can get for $24.99 on Amazon Prime.
Every penny.
Yeah, second edition, and I think let's see, if you're a tech guy, you don't like that hard copy in your hands like I do. I gotta highlight stuff, man. I just can't.
But yeah, the Kindle is $10.
Yeah, $9.99. So, like, if you like the Kindle, if you get your Nook or your Amazon Fire, your iPad, whatever you want to read on, it's $10, and it is incredible. And he walks you through the four Gospels, or what he calls the four Gospel journey.
Yes,
and he'll show it to you in a whole new way. The Gospels, the canonical Gospels,
transformative journey.
Whoa,
yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah,
he might be Jesus. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean,
sacrilege. I know. Sorry.
No.
Whoops.
It's like, well, I mean, he would even say, like, you know, the Christ is like you know, the incarnations, and like the Jesus in, like, even like you can sit next to a tree and
oh my goodness,
he's so good. Anyway, we gush when he means a lot to us.
Yeah.
And we love him very, very much, and really appreciate the interest he's taken in us as humans and this show. So getting to hear him talk about Christmas and how the darkness gives way to light, and Saint Nick, and what's going on in the Gospels, in these, you know, really familiar stories, and breaking through with new life, it's just a gift. Yeah, it's a gift to me, and it's great to get to end our interviews this year on a guy that I love so much.
Yep. I can't really add much more to that. I think you just got to listen to the episode, and hopefully, if you guys are flying or driving somewhere right now, you know, hopefully you're enjoying your time. Hopefully you get a little time off at least for the holidays.
Yes.
And we'll be back for one more this year. We're going to wrap it up and give you guys some idea of what to look forward to next year.
Yes.
If you haven't already, check out our brand new revamped website, courtesy of Ryan Battles.
We love you, Ryan Battles.
So good. www.thedeconstructionist.com. If you go there, you can literally do anything. You can connect to us on social media. You can email us to tell us how unattractive we are and how we should stick to radio.
How much you love John's winter beard.
Yeah.
If you've seen it.
You can encourage my growing of
John,
winter beard.
I want to talk about your blog for a second. It's so good, and I know you're not going to talk about it. John just published a new blog it's under Journal on our website, and it's freaking awesome. You guys need to read it. I know you put a lot of work into that, man, and it's really good.
I had a problem and I had to stop.
It's so good, man. As soon as I finished reading it, I gave it to my wife. I was like, "You need to read this right now."
Thanks, man. That means a lot.
It's so good. So I'm not gonna tell them too much about it, but just about what it means to be made in the image of God, and what that has to do with love, and how important that is, and how it calls us forward. He put some incredible words to that. So get on our website. For those of you supporting us on Patreon, thank you. You are our Christmas hug this year. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We take that very seriously. We love doing this with you guys, and we're going to make that money work for you.
Yes. Big things coming next year.
I think it's important to kind of say, like, we don't we don't pay ourselves out of that.
No.
Like none of that like goes to our pockets at all. I think that's worth saying. I think some people think that's like,
Yeah.
we're bankroll. Like, hey, I'm going to quit my job and be the Deconstructionists.
It's funny because like I take a look at our bank like often because I'm usually the one that's ordering like supplies and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, we should have like a decent balance in there. And then I realized that I had like, it all goes back into the podcast.
It all goes back into the podcast.
So like reordering t-shirts that you guys seem to be enjoying and reordering buttons and stickers and shipping books out to people who have signed up for that and paying for our domain name and all that stuff. It's such a joy and we could not be more humbled and appreciative of every single person out there. Whether you're donating or not, whether you're just sending us happy vibes over email, that means the world to us. Or on social media, just reaching out and saying, hey, like, we appreciate what you're doing. Sharing it with your friends.
Yes, that's so huge.
Word of mouth is massive for us. We've never advertised. We've never spent a dime in advertising. And so, like, this whole podcast has grown by word of mouth.
That's it.
Completely grassroots, and we're super proud of that. So thank you guys for anyone who's ever told a friend about it.
All the iTunes reviews, we take them all very, very seriously. The positive ones we use as affirmation because we're both very insecure and we need the hugs.
Yeah.
And the negative ones, we cry and then we use it as constructive criticism.
True. There's some truth to that. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that really hurt. I think you might be right.
Wrecks my day, and then I feel sad, and then
we love you guys so much. Thanks for hanging with us and Alexander Shaia for Christmas, and we will definitely be talking to you again soon. And yeah, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Keep deconstructing, everyone.
I wonder what was it like to see a light so low in the sky, to follow it blindly, to see it shining so bright. Did the stars know the light would show the way to the Savior of the world? Hear the angels are singing glory. They're telling the story that can save the world. They're telling the story that can save the world. Did they understand the fate of the world in a baby's hand? They were part of the story, part of a master plan. Did the stars know the light would show the way to the Savior of the world? Hear the angels are singing glory. They're telling the story that can save the world. They're telling the story that can save the world. The stars hung in the sky, gazing upon the world that night, a world that was different and finally had a chance. Did the stars know the light would show the way to the Savior of the world? Hear the angels are singing glory. They're telling the story that can save the world. They're telling the story that can save the world. They're telling the story